What's up, everybody? So today we have one of my most favorite projects in the world. I like to call them the Al Fixits. That's A-L Fixit. Al Fixit. We all know them. We all have friends like that. You're in a bunch of friends and you say, my lawnmower's broken, my car's broken, my keys are broken. And the guy goes, hey, I'll fix it. And then you end up with what we have here today. So we have a snowblower, less than a year old. He bought it at the end of last season, left some gas in it, and it didn't want to run anymore. So it ran with the choke on, but wouldn't run with the choke off. So Al Fixit came over and said, hey, I'll fix it. Took the carburetor apart, and now it pours gas out of here like it's its business, hence the paper towels. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take these two bolts off right here. We are going to pull this carburetor completely off, take it apart, clean it up, figure out exactly why it's now leaking gas. I suspect that they probably took the float bowl off and killed the O-ring, so we're going to have to put an O-ring in it and a few other odds and ends. But I'm going to take you guys through tearing this off of here and getting it cleaned up. So here we go. Alright guys, so we're going to start by pinching off this fuel line so we don't leak all over the place. And yes, those are actually special pliers for pinching off hoses. And then we're going to try to get this little guy off, which hopefully we should be able to do. There we go. I'll just grab that. Just grab that clamp. Ooh, look at that. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but that's probably part of the problem. Some contamination in the fuel. And obviously these things being so cheap, they don't have a fuel filter on them. So let's get this carb off. We'll pull some of these hoses. There's a linkage way up underneath there that we might have a little bit of trouble getting to, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Alright, so that right there is the mechanism that actually vents the crankcase, which is kind of interesting. Huh. Alright, and here's the carb. We got a little bit of a linkage to tackle up in here and a small spring, which doesn't look like it's going to be a huge issue. Alright, so we got the spring. Let's see what that linkage looks like. Oh, alright, well, that's easy. Just had to twist the throttle and pop that off. Let's get this gasket off of here. Now we can hopefully not destroy the inner gasket, which would be awesome. So let's get in there. I find that working on small engines, using a razor blade like this for stupid little stuff really saves a ton of time and money, because then you're not ruining gaskets and such. Because you can kind of poke and prod and peel and do what you need to do to get these things off without really hurting anything. Just be careful when you're bringing these by the threads, because you'll tend to ruin the gasket material. Alright, so carburetor is off. I'm going to take this whole unit off the bench here, so we got some room to work, and then I'll bring you guys back in so that we can tear this carburetor down, and I can give you a bird's eye view of what's going on. Alright, so I'm going to get you guys in here as close as possible to what we got going on here with this carburetor. So see if we can peel this gasket off without ruining it, so we don't ruin it when we tear apart the actual carb. Alright, so we're going to start by taking the bowl off, and we're going to see why this thing is leaking first and foremost. I want to see what they did when they pulled it apart that's causing it to now leak profusely. So let's get that bowl off of there. Oh my God. Ugh. Oh. Wow. Yeah, that's not good. Alright, well that gasket looks good. O-ring looks alright. I don't know if you guys can see all the crap that's in the bottom of that. That's what happens when you leave this ethanol saturated gas in there. Pretty nasty shit. Alright, so now we're going to pull out the float, and then we're going to pull the float needle and make sure that stuff's okay. Alright, so the needle looks good. Not too shabby there, so we know it's getting fuel. Shake the float to see if it's got any fluid in it. Sometimes these can crack and actually fill with fuel, and therefore they never float, which means that they won't come up and seal again. They just hang down, and it'll tend to leak fuel because of that. So that looks pretty good. Alright, so now, customer's complaint initially was that he would fire this thing up and it would run for a couple of minutes on choke, but as soon as he went off choke, it would die out. So usually what that means is that we've got some contamination in the jetting somewhere or something of that nature. So what we're going to do is, I don't know if you guys can see down in this particular hole, there is a jet down in that hole that we're going to pull out and try to clean it. I'll bring you guys in as soon as I pull that jet. Now be very careful when you guys are doing this stuff. These jets are made out of brass and they're very delicate, so you need to make sure you're applying down pressure to the actual jet itself, as well as, you know, your normal rotational pressure, but you have to be very, very careful with it. You don't want this screwdriver slipping because you can ruin the jet. Alright, so that was a little suspect. That puppy was really stuck in there. And it looks like somebody's actually chewed on it once before with a screwdriver, so. See if we can get that out of there, and I'll show you guys the damage that's on it already. Alright, so there was some leftover brass in there. There's the jet, if it'll focus. There we go. That's the main jet. Now, you can see there's a bit of damage on there from somebody trying to get it out previously. Probably Fixit. And then if you notice, can't really see much light through there. So that main jet is probably plugged up solid with either some of this brass or just plugged up in general. So we'll have to clean that out. Then this is another very important part of things right here. This is what they call the emulsion tube. This tube has some very, very tiny holes in it. Those are the first things that tend to plug up with this ethanol fuel. Now they are made out of brass, so they will plug up quite significantly and very quickly. So we're gonna have to clean that out too. So I'm gonna get something to clean this jet out, and probably going to use, believe it or not, stranded copper wire works really, really well to clean it out, and it doesn't leave any garbage behind. So we're gonna knock that out now. See what we come up with. Alright, so we've got basically some 26 gauge wire here, and we're just gonna actually try to feed it through the holes in this emulsion tube. Like so. Come on, guy. Focus. There we go. So now it's going through those, and then we'll just run it back and forth. Make sure that those are clean. And for doing this, guys, what I'll tend to do is I'll crimp it a little bit on the actual wire strand I'm using. I'll put a couple of crimp marks in it so it's got some roughness to it. And that'll help clean out any debris that's caught in these holes. Because this emulsion tube will greatly affect how your small engine idles. Because this provides most of your idle mixture. And I'm actually getting some pretty decent corrosion out of these little holes here, which could definitely be the cause of the poor idle. Alrighty. Now, let's reassemble this carb. This O-ring is suspect as to why it was leaking. May have pinched it. Doesn't look too bad, but we'll see what happens. Alright, so emulsion tube is going to go down in there first. And it'll go down in this orientation here with the thimble up on top. And I'll try to get you guys around to see. Oh wow, there's stuff in there too. Alright, let me clean that out too. Alright, it looked like there were some shavings down in that hole as well, so alright, let's get this emulsion tube back in. We'll use a little bit of welding wire to push it back down in there. Make sure that's nice and clean. The way you can check, and I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, we'll see. The emulsion tube, if you can see that, right down in that general vicinity right there, that emulsion tube protrudes into the carburetor. So as air comes in through here, it passes over top of that emulsion tube. It creates a vacuum here, which draws fuel from the bowl up into the engine itself. It's a pretty simple concept, really. It's like if you take a straw, put it into your drink, and blow over top of the straw. Like if you blow air across the top of the straw here, you will see the fluid level rise in your straw. So give it a try. But very simple concept with these small engine carburetors. There's really not a whole lot to them. So now we're going to take the main jet and take a look. Now I can see through it. So I think what I'm going to do though is I'm actually going to run a very tiny drill bit through this just to make sure it's super clean. So I'm going to go do that right now. And then once we're done beveling the edges, we'll run the wire through it again just to clean it out and make sure everything is where it needs to be. Alright, and then another thing you want to do is if it's been damaged like this one has, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to get in there and see that. I'm having a hard time getting this thing to focus. Come on. Well, anywho, there's some damaged brass up on top of this that may or may not flake off. And so we're just going to take the blade and kind of flake it off before anything can happen. Alright, and then we'll just screw this back down in here. Make sure our screwdriver is nice and clean. Alright, now again, you want this to be tight, but you do not want to hurt any of that brass. So go tight while pushing down, and you should be good. I mean, you don't have to like crank it down with every freaking bit of your might, but just put some pressure on it, crank it in. Alright, now we're going to stick the float back on. I'm going to clean this off too because that's got some debris on it. And all you have to do with this is just line the needle back up in the fuel feed. And then we'll take our pin, slide the pin through, and then we want to make sure that we've got very easy movement of that float. So what basically happens is your fuel level, when it's in here and your fuel level fills up, it closes that float. That stops the fuel flow from this tube right here into the carburetor. As your engine uses fuel, this float will drop down, allowing more fuel into the bowl until it fills up, and then it closes again, and it just repeats this cycle. Alright, so now we're going to put the bottom bowl back on. I checked over this O-ring. It doesn't look like it's been damaged anywhere, so we're just going to pop that back in. May have just gotten it a little off kilter when he put everything back together. If not, we have O-rings, we can put them in. Oh. I see what they did. Now, the reason this was leaking is because probably won't be able to see that either, but there is deformation of that particular top section there where it is no longer flat and it's recessed. So what's happening is when you put this on and it bottoms out, it's not bottomed out. It's not even touching the O-ring anymore. Alright, now we got to straighten this cap back out. Stuff like this happens every time Al Fixit's on the job. So what we're going to do is just put a socket there, put this down on top of the socket, And then I've got this, you know, it's just basically a 5/16 tool for doing self-tappers. Put that on there, we'll tap it a little bit. A little bit more. Alright, let's see how that fits. Alright. Now we're looking good. It's actually sitting on the O-ring. So we should be able to get a good seal there. Now we'll pop the bottom bolt back in, make sure it's still got the little washer on the bottom of it there. Oh yeah, now we're on that O-ring. Can actually hear it. So that should seal up nicely. Now when you tighten these back up, don't go all He-Man on it, because you don't really need to. And I'm going to loosen that and just check to make sure that everything is okay with that bolt, because that felt a little funny. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Cool. So get that on there. Alright, you just need to give it a little eat. You don't want to go yaw. You want to go eat, and that's it. And you're good. You don't need much to tighten these things down. So we have a nice tight setup here now, and it's actually on the O-ring. So what I'm going to do now that this carb is all back together is we're going to get that big ass thing back up on top of the table. We'll put the carb back on it, and we'll see if we can fire it up. Alright guys, we got it back up on the table, so we're just literally going to put it back together the same way that it came apart. We got to get the gasket on, the carburetor, the other gasket, the X part. Then we have to actually put this linkage back on and get this little spring back on, which is always a blast. So here we go. Usually what's nice about these gaskets is there's an imprint that you'll be able to see, that little imprint that's on there. That imprint will help you line this thing back up again. The gasket goes on like so. And again, be careful when you're going up over the threads, because you can actually damage the gasket. Alright, now we're going to try to sneak the carburetor back on and get the linkage all in one shot here. Maybe. Helps to have the carburetor loose too while you're putting the linkage back together, so you can move things around if you need to. There we go. Alright, so the linkage is in place. Now we just have to get that funky little spring. And this is again where these guys come in handy. Perfect. Spring is in place. Now we can put the crankcase breather back on. Just make sure you get the choke lever through. Now these little hoses here that you see, or this particular hose, is actually the prime. So it's this little bulb up top here. When you can't see it, but when you push the little bulb, it actually pushes fuel into the carburetor itself to get things primed up. So make sure we got that hooked up. That's there, and we forgot to put the other gasket on. So again, make sure you double check everything when you're working on these. Not that this gasket is a huge problem if it were missing, but it's always better to have them on there than to not have them on there. So again, we'll line it up with the cutouts here. Make sure that goes on there. Put that back on. Get that breather hose on there. Put the retaining nuts on. You want to make sure you tighten everything down evenly. Again, you don't need to go too crazy. Just give it a snug. It's not going anywhere. We'll hook up our primer bulb line here, and then we'll hook it up to the primer bulb up here. And then we're going to hook the fuel line back up. And yes, off camera, I did actually drain the rest of the fuel out of this to get the shit out of the lines. So, don't yell at me. So I did manage to leave a little bit of fuel in the tank. So I'm going to see if this thing will actually fire up now. Alright guys, so there you go. Basically what's going on with it right now is it's running great, except for the fact that it's almost completely out of gas. So as soon as we put more gas in it, it will be absolutely fine. I really hope you guys enjoyed this particular video. I know again it was an offshoot, but that's what we like to do here. Keep things random, keep you guys interested. So please, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know what you want to see in future videos, and I will see you guys on the next one. Have a good night.